Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidikena yopakurotam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranchaliranatosmi stuve patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam katra sutrasya bhashyasya kramad vivaranasya cha. We discussed the 41st Sutra in the last session. Sattva Shuddhi Saumanasya Aikagra Indriya Jaya Atma Darshana Yogitvani Cha Bhavanti. So, what normally happens to a person who takes to yoga, both physical and psychological, but more stress is to be given to the physical aspects, psychological aspects. The point is, there is a gradation in this context. When a person tries to practice yamas and niyamas, he will naturally start feeling a kind of inner contentment, and that contentment will create an air of tranquility and peace in his mind. So naturally his physical expressions become more even. So it is the physical aspect that normally will attract the attention of others. But gradually such a person will start manifesting a deeper and more psychological aspects as a result of practicing yamas and niyamas. So you can very easily explain this in the light of normal human behavior. Suppose a person has got a very violent tendency. It may not always be expressed externally, you may not be able to understand it. People can hide their feelings very well. But even if they try their best to hide their feelings, you can see the inner friction going on within, and that friction can be seen in the facial expressions. So that is a physical aspect. But as one goes deeper and deeper into the practice of yamas and niyamas, and that's the more important aspect here. Other characteristics like Satya Pradesha, other important characteristics may not always be so easily visible. But when a spiritual seeker begins to practice yamas and niyamas, he cannot really hide his own goodness from others. This may not always be recognized by everyone or appreciated by everyone. That is, of course, another aspect is there. A good person or goodness of a person, the sattvic qualities may not always find appreciation or approval, but those who have somehow some connection with these qualities will immediately be able to connect with such a person, with such a yogi or yoga practitioner, and he will be able to understand. And this is how the aura or the transpersonal personality evolves. This is an important thing to understand. So that's why purification of mind, pleasantness of feeling, and control of senses. Control of senses may not be physically visible, but the control of senses will produce sattva shuddhi, and it will produce saumanasyam. Saumanasyam actually means pleasantness, tranquility of mind, peace, a peaceful expression in the mind. The point is, these things may not always be visible, and in the sense it expresses itself outwardly, like the muscles of a muscular person. There is nothing very abstract or profound or subtle in it. It is physically verifiable. But the subtle or of a personality which is invisible. It may not be readily comprehended by everyone, but those who have some connection with those qualities will be able to discern, and in that sense it is very intense and very real. So there is something invisible and also visible. The visible may be expressions, and invisible may be the inner feelings and peace of mind, tranquility, which will be visible only to those who can appreciate, approve, who can understand, who can connect with that. Otherwise it may not be understood or recognized by the general public. So that's the idea behind, and indriya jayatvam, etc. Next one is very important, santoshat anuttama sukhalabha. It's a very, very famous word, santoshat. From this contentment, because of this contentment, naturally that person will start enjoying a sense of happiness. So it is very well recognized in spiritual psychology, in all ancient traditions, that the greatest happiness is when you don't have any desire to fulfill. In fact, Vyasa says something interesting here. Yaccha kama sukham loke, yaccha divyam mahat sukham, trishnakshaya sukha sede, narhada shodashim kalam. Is a very important verse which is quoted, and Vyasa actually quotes this. It's not Vyasa's own sloka. It's not this complete. What it means is, whatever pleasure, whatever enjoyment, whatever happiness that you derive when some of your desires are fulfilled, out of that you get a happiness or pleasure. Well, any worldly enjoyment, people who want money, when they get a lot of money, they feel happy. When they are in need of a job, when they get a job, they become happy. So an example of kama sukham, I mean fulfillment of a desired object, which produces happiness and pleasantness. That's true. But the problem with that happiness is, it is only temporary. It actually is nothing but absence of unhappiness. Any kind of worldly enjoyment is only a temporary postponement of misery. Any worldly enjoyment is just an absence of misery. I mean, but when you go beyond both, then you have perpetual happiness. That's what Vyasa is going to mention in this verse. And he says, Trishna kshaya sukhasya ede. Trishna means desire, which Buddha used the same word in his doctrine of Praditya Samutpada, which is the 12-link chain of which actually causes life cycles, birth, death, rebirth, and again continuing, this past, present and future, all linked together by this Praditya Samutpada, the 12-link chain, this wheel of what you call samsara in the Sanskrit language, means worldly transmigration, transmigratory circle, which he says is rooted in Trishna. Trishna in Pali. So now Vyasa says, before the happiness or joy or the tranquility of mind that you feel when you have no desire at all to fulfill, before that supreme happiness, the happiness of fulfilling, Vyasa's language is, it is not equal to a 16th part of the pleasure derived by the cessation of desire. Cessation of desire. complete freedom from desire. That produces a kind of pleasure and enjoyment that is 16 times as profound, as enjoyable as the enjoyment that you get by fulfilling your worldly desires. This is the language of Vyasa. Very interesting analysis. Actually, Vijnana Bhikshu in his Yoga Vartika, he brings in some mantras from Taittiriya Upanishad Yajurveda, Krishna Yajurveda, and he substantiates this idea with some very forceful statements. So I shall try to explain the commentary, super commentary called Yoga Bhashya Vartikam by Vijnana Bhikshu. Of course, he closely follows Vyasa. Remember, we should always know there is a reason why these commentaries are important. We are actually entering the world of pure gold mines, these commentaries. We should all know very well Patanjali are very, very brief statements which may not mean anything to anyone unless you read and understand the sutras in the light of the commentaries and super commentaries written by a succession of this lineage of the great yoga teachers. Again, teachers of Yoga Sutras I'm talking about. So Vijnana Bhikshu says, Santoshat Anuttama Sukhalabha. He just quotes, of course this is a quotation of the sutra. Then he says, Nasti Uttamam Sukham Yasmar Tadrisa Sukhasya Labha Santosha Sthairya Bhavadi Iti Arthaha. What it means is, the obtainment of that unique kind of pleasure which comes to a person when he is totally free from any desire. Because when a person has no desire, his mind remains calm and quiet, like a lake or a pond, but there is not a single bubble or a wave or current. It is absolutely calm and quiet. So a desire means suddenly a wave. A strong desire, ambition means like a tsunami. And when the tsunami comes, cities and towns and villages get flooded, people die. It creates misery. So every desire creates misery. Now I should mention about something very important. Is it possible for one to live without desire? The question will arise, because we should not get away with the impression that this is kind of ascetic ideal. What it means is, when we understand, when we get a handle on this psychology of desire and the problems it could create, then we'll be able to, first of all, lower the level of desires, and then we will be able to give a promotion to our own desires. We can have desire for something higher. And that is very much approved in the Yoga Sutras called Parinama Dukkha. You can promote, you can go for a higher goal when you have your mind fixed on something sublime, something wonderful, something elevating. Then that is also a kind of desire, but that desire has got one side. It gives you peace of mind. It is not wretchedness. It is not misery. To give an example, Buddha felt this problem. 28 years, a prince brought up in a palace. He did not know anything about the dark side of life. He happened to meet a sick man, old man, and also a dead body being taken to the cremation ground. Three terrible pictures of realities of human life. death, old age, and sickness. And then he saw a saint, a monk. Now, and Buddha began to think and ponder, and that prompted him to leave his palace behind, walked and more than 1,000 miles, went to Buddha Gaya and sat there in a meditation. Now, the point is, what was in his mind when he was walking more than 1,000 miles from Lumbini in Nepal, today's Nepal, to Bodh Gaya? Was he crying and weeping, very, very miserable looking? No. That kind of higher ambition, spiritual ambition, has something sublime in it. It is called the sublimation, a promotion, or elevation of desire. So that's what happens. And as you give your desire a promotion, what happens? The lower desire gets a back seat. It takes a back seat. And then you'll find yourself starting enjoying life. If you can read great books, listen to great ideas, trying to do good and great things, and then have a desire, a sincere desire to do something good, to do meditation, for your own spiritual practice, or maybe doing something good, and you have a desire to do more and more. That desire doesn't have a wretched feeling behind it. So there is a gradual promotion. I can quote Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna says, ego is there, and ego is linked to desire. Desire speaks the language of ego, or ego speaks the language of desire. They are both twin brothers that are interlinked. So Sri Ramakrishna says, if you have got this ego or desire, you do one thing. You give it a promotion. You employ it and make it do some good work. In Sri Ramakrishna's language, this rascal ego has to be eradicated. It means an ego that gives us misery, ego that makes us greedy, struggling, working more and more for money, wealth, ambition, and giving sleepless nights. That's one ego. Well, now that ego, you cannot just wish it away. The ego should be given a kind of spiritual orientation. I shall read some wonderful books. I shall do some wonderful work. You may call it karma yoga in the language of Hindu spiritual tradition, Buddhist spiritual tradition. You will do karma yoga. I shall read some books. I shall do something good for the world. Well, there is an ego involved, but that ego is a friendly ego. And that ego will eventually take you beyond ego. So Sri Ramakrishna says, this ego should be a servant ego. I mean, I shall do something on behalf of God, something spiritual. That kind of ego. So remember, that aspect is not often considered in Patanjali's system. Patanjali's system is more prescriptive. But Sri Ramakrishna is both prescriptive and also descriptive. Patanjali's system, he reads more like Renan Martin's old book on grammar for high school students. This, that, do this, do that, with well-structured examples. It's like that. Because Patanjali is an old-fashioned man and didn't have much time to write elaborate commentaries, and he was not a spiritual teacher the way we look upon the great spiritual epoch makers. He didn't come with a mission for the world, but he taught some very wonderful spiritual truths in a very prescriptive language, which actually has created a unique spiritual legacy. In that respect, he is more prescriptive. So that's why Vijnana Bhikshu, who incorporated devotional ideas, Vedantic ideas into his commentary, he puts it in a more descriptive language. That's why he says, Nasti uttamam sukham yasmat tadrisha sukasya labhaga
santosha sthairya bhavati iti artha. So what it means is, this obtainment is the unique pleasure or enjoyment that comes when you have no desire. That is a state unique in itself. There is no greater pleasure than the pleasure that you get, than enjoyment that you get when you have no desire at all. Santosha, again he says, Trishnakshayohi santoshaha. So what is santosha? According to him, weakening, gradual cessation of greed. That is the word used by Vijnana Bhikshu. What is santosha? Gradual, slow, degrees by degrees, cessation, weakening of greed. And Trishna pranibandha pagame cha chittasya swabhavika sattvadikya nimittiga sukha swata eva avirbhavati. So Trishna pranibandha pagame, Trishna or desire is an obstacle. That obstacle, apagama, means it is removed. Then what happens? Chittasya swabhavika sattvadikya. Then what happens? When desire, greed are gone, our mind gets more and more sattva guna. Sattva guna is associated with tranquility, peace, wisdom, serenity, even-mindedness. All these qualities are natural for a person who has got this sattvika guna. Then what happens? This sattva guna increases. And sattva guna adhikya nimittaga sukha subhavada. When you have this tranquility, peace, then what happens? You have this pleasure, happiness. That is called contentment. That is how Vijnana Bhikshu explained this. That means when the obstacles that stand in the way of enjoying life, what is the obstacle? Desire. When that desire, extreme greed, in fact greed is the word used, that is the implication in the Vijnana Bhikshu's language. When the greed is removed, that's why Trishna apagame, when he is completely removed, then what happens? Mind becomes more and more sattvic, serene, tranquil and peace. And when that happens, you feel a kind of an inner joy and happiness. Then happened. Natat sukhe vishyapeksha iti. Why is it so unique? Why is this kind of enjoyment, this enjoyment that comes out of total cessation of desire? Why is it so unique? He says, Vijnana Bhikshu says, Nasatsuke Vishyapeksha means it is not dependent upon a desired object. All other desire are focused on some object that we desire for. If a person wants wealth, wealth is an object of his desire. Reputation, may have enough reputation but more of it. Then that becomes the object. So if you have a desire, and when that desire is fulfilled, you get the kind of enjoyment, but that enjoyment is dependent upon an object which is not permanent, which comes and goes. Money comes and goes. So the enjoyment that you derive when you become wealthy, that enjoyment also goes away like the money, the wealth that disappears one day. So it is dependent upon one object, a desired object. Tad nirvishayam shanti sukham atma sukham uchyate. And he says, Vijnana Bhikshu says, it is the spiritual tranquility, spiritual enjoyment, spiritual pleasure. That is contentment. When you have that contentment, you may not express it openly in words, but you will express it in your ability to remain calm and quiet and even-minded, even in times of difficulties. There may be hard times, difficulties, challenges, but you are able to face them with a degree of even-mindedness. That's the time when we understand that this person has got contentment. And of course, then te yeshadam prajapate anantaka sa ego brahmana anantaka shotriyasi chaka magadasi ityadi sudege. Then he quotes the Taittiriya Upanishad mantra, which gives you ananda mimamsa, graduation of enjoyment. Which ultimately concludes that before spiritual contentment, no other enjoyment or pleasure can remain, because that spiritual enjoyment is supreme. It is the highest degree of enjoyment and tranquility and peace. When you have it, you have no desire for anything else. That is the language of Vijnana Bhikshu. So here you find Santoshat Anuttama Sukhalabha. That's mean unsurpassed pleasure that comes as a result of contentment. So then what? So this is a gradual, this is a gradation, a gradual evolution going on. That, as we mentioned in the 41st Sutra, Sattva Shuddhi Saumanasya Aikagya Indriya Atmadarshana Yogitvani Bhavanti. That means purification of mind, pleasantness of feeling, one-pointedness, control of senses, and fitness for realizing the Atman. So there is an internal mental purification, then mental purity comes, then all obstacles, all sorrows disappear, then a kind of inner peace and tranquility, one-pointedness, steadiness, control, even-mindedness. All these become natural to a person who has this contentment. That's idea. Very, very well known sutra. You can ask questions when we discuss this sutra later. So that is the 42nd sutra. 43rd sutra is very, very important. We'll discuss that. It comes here. Kayendriya siddhihi asuddhikshayat tapasaha. So tapasaha asuddhikshayat kayendriya siddhihi bhavati. This is the explanation. It means when a person gets established in tapa, austerities, then all mental impurities will go away. As a result of this, efficiency, that's the language to be used, efficiency comes. One is Kaya Siddhi, the other is Indriya Siddhi. That's a Kaya Indriya Siddhi. In other words, what the meaning is this: when a person practices austerity, let us say some rigorous disciplines, fasting, or maybe you just a few days continuously, 3 days, 7 days, and so on, practicing the taking of holy names or reading holy scriptures. Every religious tradition has its own rituals, its own practices of austerity. As a result of this, what happens? Our mind gets purified. We may ask the question, by fasting, how does my mind get pure? Apparently you don't see a connection. What happens, when we deny ourselves something that we need, then we are able to withstand the difficulties that arise out of this denial of what we need for everyday sustenance. Then what happens, we will start thinking of something higher. If you fast for some days or maybe for a day, if you fast completely, you start thinking of something beyond the body. When it is done with a sense of sanctity and sacredness. If you do another kind of austerity, let us say 3 days you spend reading some holy scriptures, attending a retreat, listening to lectures, living in a particular atmosphere, in a place, it's a kind of austerity, tapa. It is called tapa. Then what happens? We start thinking of something higher and transcendental, empirical. So that's what happens. So when our mind connects with something transcendental, the mind naturally gets a promotion. It generates a lot of healthy spiritual energies. This is what happens. That's how Kayendriya Siddhihi Asuddhikshaya Tapasaha. Because of austerity, impurities get removed, mostly kleshas get slowly weakened, and then there is the perfection in the body, in the senses. What I mean called Kaya Siddhi and Indriya Siddhi. According to commentators, there are certain implications here. Kaya Siddhi means is certain powers that a person will get. It's called Anima, Mahima, Garima, Laghima, Prapti, Prakamyam, Isittum, Vasittum. So these are some of the Ashta Siddhis called. We can become small, we can become very big, heavy, light, and then you can attain whatever you want, and whatever even without any effort you can have everything you want, and then you get control over others, and you'll be able to get people's attention, interaction, and so on. Now remember, we cannot really explain this in a public class, how this happens and why this happens. We can only say that the having people known to display these qualities. But what we should remember, these qualities are not, use the popular language, is not a big deal. In the Patanjali himself makes it very clear, commentators also make it very clear, that these so-called occult powers which we discussed in the Vibhudipada they don't constitute the goal of yoga practices. They are only a particular stage that you should go beyond. It is an intermediary stage that you should go beyond. You should not get stuck at that stage. So naturally you find people who practice a lot of disciplines, a lot of self-denial, a lot of austerities, will generate a unique aura about them, some spiritual qualities. We have been known in all traditions, whether Christian mystics, Hindu ascetics, Jains, Buddhist monks. It's known, there are many stories, and they are supposed to have possessed some of these what so-called occult or superhuman characteristics, but those who display and parade them are not appreciated in the spiritual tradition. Rather, those who make too much of these external powers are not, they are not considered to be of the highest order. It's an important point, remember. So that is the essence of the Kaya Siddhi. Indriya Siddhi is nothing, the ability to pursue things, subtle ideas, distant ideas. So that is naturally, that can be easily verified. Those who take to yoga, those who practice yamas or niyama, those who practice meditation, those who you can find they are able to understand things in a more subtle, in a more profound way, because of the energy resources of the body system, the mental structure, mental world are preserved and focused and directed into sublime channel. As a result of this, they are able to see things, understand things, comprehend ideas which are very subtle. In fact, if you read the history of a man like Vivekananda or Sri Ramakrishna or Christ or Buddha or Shankaracharya, can we ever imagine a boy leaves his home in search of his guru after having mastered all the scriptures that we know in Hinduism, all the four Vedas, all Upanishads, all grammar, everything. There was nothing that Shankara had not mastered. Ashtame Chaduro Veda Dwadase Sarvashastrabit. By 8 years, he had finished all the four Vedas, which if you had to fill the whole volume, you need 2 rows of a big bookshelf. He had already mastered. And then by 12th year, there was nothing for him to learn. By 16th year, he had written books that today Pandits, scholars take 40 years, 50 years to study and master and debate and discuss and quarrel with. What Shankara says this, and all was written by a boy who had not just come out of his high school. He was a 9th grader. That was Shankaracharya's stage. And he established 10 monastic orders. Remember, Ignatius Loyola is the founder of the Jesuits. Shankaracharya founded 10 such monastic orders. Plus writing all these books. And he did not just write theological books, dialectical works. So if we can combine Aristotle, Plato, Augustine, Aquinas and Kant in one bag, that was the kind of intellect he had. And not only that, he also wrote the most profound Sanskrit poetry, devotional poetry. He established hundreds of temples. When today the puja we are conducting here, all these mantras were formulated by him. And he established 4 monasteries in 4 distant corners of India. Travelled all over Indian subcontinent 4 times. If you go to the extreme Himalayan region near China border, in Tibetan border, you can find Shankaracharya's ashrama. He found it. And extreme south, extreme east, extreme west. So everywhere you find now. And he finished all his work in 32 years. And his dialectical works, his arguments are still studied all over the world. Swami Vivekananda brought this in 19th century and expounded in modern English. That's what's called Vedanta today, Advaita Vedanta. Now, where did he get all these powers? Today you find a child may be able to memorize maybe all the figures of a car. He may memorize the capital cities of 200 countries in the world. But here this little boy was sitting and writing all these books, which today Pandits take their whole lifetime to study and discuss. So that's why he called, Indriya Siddhi, the ability to perceive and understand subtle spiritual truths and articulate. So this is an important thing. So I'm just giving an example, that's all. Next one is also a very important sutra, which I will discuss in the light of Vijnana Bhikshu again. That is, that sutra is 43rd sutra discussed. That of course we finished the 44th one. 44th sutra is Swadhyaya Ishtadevata Samprayoga. This needs a lot of explanation. Swadhyayat, which means Shauja Santosha Tapas Swadhyaya Isa Pradhana Niyamas. So that is one of the niyamas. I mean, listening to holy words, mantras, reading scriptures, trying to meditate on the meaning of holy words and internalization of great spiritual ideas called Swadhyaya. So what happens when you do this is mentioned here, Ishtadevata Samprayoga. Samprayoga is a word, there's a special meaning. What it means is, suppose you are uttering a mantra, and Hindu tradition, into pantheon, there are many deities, Ganapati, Vishnu, Shiva, and so on. If you go to nearby Hindu temples, you can see. And when they do puja, there are different mantras uttered. When they put flowers, the deities, they utter different mantras. These mantras are sacred verbal symbols which when repeated they will influence our mind, they will give us something in terms of spiritual fulfillment, because those mantras are unique, strong, powerful word symbols which will be practiced and chanted, recited and meditated upon by great devotees and saints and sages for thousands of years. So they have acquired a potency when you also recite it or when you listen to it. If our mind is ready, when our mind is ready, we will realize the potency. And what happens when you chant these mantras for long years with a sense of sanctity and sacredness and continuity? Ishtadevata Samprayog. What it means is you will be able to see with your own eyes these divine celestial beings called different devatas. That is the idea behind it. And you will be able to talk to them. You will feel that they are actually real and you can physically feel their presence. That is the implication of this 44th Sutra. Now, this is again, it is not something that we can verbally explain, but if you listen to or if you yourself recite some sacred mantras, when you feel a kind of inner poise and tranquility, it means those mantras do have an effect on our mental system, again depending upon our own approach, our own spiritual fitness. And how this happens, Vyasa says, Nivartyamanameva tapo hinasti asudhyavaranamallam. So what happens is, when you chant these mantras, what happens? Our mental impurities are removed. What are impurities? Impurities may be negativity, bad habits, bad thoughts, emotions and feelings that normally people carry with them as a baggage, which create conflicts and anxieties in our daily life. All of them slowly start getting removed. The dirt and these impurities create a kind of veil, a curtain, and when that is removed, what happens? Then we are able to Tadavaranamala abhagama kaya siddhi animadya tata indriya siddhi duran shravana darshana ityada. So that means when this veil of impurities is removed, what happens? Mind becomes pure. Then mind is able to connect with this spiritual. That's why Swadhyaya is important, as an important tool. Remember, this Swadhyaya also is the beginning of sadhana, that is Kriya Yoga we mentioned, that's the beginning. That can be Karma Yoga, etc. But here Swadhyaya means chanting, listening to some holy, sacred word symbols. After all, we know very well that if we go on listening to some good sounds, good words, good sentences, we call them holy words or whatever it is. These words will have an effect on our mental system because we are listening with our ears and the mind grasps it, and when mind gets connected to these words, the mind also will be affected and we will feel peace of mind, happiness and so on, serenity and so on. The opposite also is true. If we go on listening to bad words, use bad language, that also will have an effect on the mind. So it can be physically verified in any way. In fact, that's a tool without being aware of it. They use this tool in modern management techniques, and people are asked to repeat again and again, I shall succeed, I shall win, I have no problem, you know, raising your hands to the sky and imagine the energy is flowing all over your body. Well, really, and then you chant some mantras or whatever it is, you know. So, and when we do that with a great sense of sanctity and sacredness, it really works. And when you pay $500 per session, then it works all the better because you have to get something back for the money you have spent. If you listen to lectures for which you don't pay anything, you don't take it seriously. That's what happens. So, the point is, this Swadhyaya is real, it is physically it can be verified. That's the idea behind. Then next one is, of course, we mentioned this. That is 44th one is over. Then next one is 45. Samadhi siddhiki Ishwara pranidhanat. Ishwara pranidhanat. I mean, when you have complete sense of devotion, dedication to God, to divine reality, then what happens? Samadhi siddhi. That is again, that can be proved when a person, if he can really believe in this spiritual technique and principle of surrender, if you do it sincerely and completely, what happens, you know, we feel just like your glass is empty, so it is filled with something else. Complete surrender means you are emptying your own mind, and when the mind is emptied, it gets filled with some new energy. If it is that the surrender is not complete, you know, if your glass is only half empty, suppose your glass is half filled with water, and you pour milk into it, you get 50% water, 50% milk. If the glass is completely empty and you pour milk into it, you get 100% milk. Similarly, this Ishwara pranidhana means complete self-surrender to God. When it becomes really self-surrender, it's just like emptying the glass. And when our mind is emptied, it doesn't remain empty, it gets filled up with a new divine spiritual energy. So that is why Ishwara pranidhana creates this samadhi. So you can find all this in some of the Buddhist scriptures. Dhammapada says, you know, Isya chedam samuchinnam ulagacham samuhadam savediva rittim samadhim adhigachati. This is in Dhammapada. In Sanskrit, of course, it is Yasya tat samuchinnam mulaghatam samuddhadam savediva ratrauva samadhim adhigachati. He in whom unworthy feelings are totally absent and completely absent, he alone attains samadhi. That is Buddha's teachings. So when our mind gets completely emptied of all foreign bodies or undesirable things, then that mind gets filled up with something sublime. And that's what we call samadhi. Next one is Sthira Sukham Asanam. This we discussed at some point. What is asana? Posture. That means steady and comfortable form of staying. That means the definition is given. Yena samstharena avasthidasya sthayiryam sukham cha siddhyati tas sthira sukham. Suppose you are sitting or you are staying, you are being established in a particular posture, and you feel a kind of sthayiryam and saukyam. You feel kind of, you can do it for a long time without any effort. With no effort, but you can sit in that posture for a long time. That state is called asana. And it turns out that all the classical works on Hatha Yoga, the Gheranda Samhita, Siva Yoga Pradipika or Adya Yoga Pradipika, whatever, all these great books were being written by great yoga practitioners. Maybe they had developed a physical culture out of this yoga. Maybe ancient yogis developed different physical postures to make their body pliable, flexible enough to be able to sit for a long time in an effortless manner. So if you go to some of the places in India, Buddhist caves are there. You can see the pictures of Buddha and many other Buddhist bhikshus sitting for a long time in Padmasana and different yoga postures. You can find Hindu deities, Hindu saints. So that means this Padmasana posture or whatever may be Sustigasana, Sukhasana posture must have been practiced by saints and sages of Hindu Buddhist traditions for thousands of years. But in order to make the body flexible enough to be able to sit for a long time without any effort, with a sense of total pleasure and happiness, they must have developed a lot of postures, additional postures, which makes the body physically strong enough so that body doesn't interfere when you're meditating. Body doesn't announce its presence, because if the body is not healthy, it will interfere in your spiritual pursuit. So in order to avoid that, the body should be made a wonderful instrument. For that, these different postures must have been developed. This is one possible explanation. We will discuss that later when we discuss the next one, Prayatna Shaithilya and Ananda Samapatti. These two terms are used in the 47th Sutra. At that time we will discuss this. Now we can have interaction. Thank you. Most welcome. Yeah. Most welcome.
Hariom Swamiji.
Yeah.
Swamiji, you were talking about surrender,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So in today's world, there are a number of causes, extremist causes that we see across the world, including among Hindu practitioners. And a lot of issues that we see in today's world come from a sense of surrendering and blindly following a wrong kind of cause, a wrong agenda. So when does someone's spiritual seeking transform into something where they decide to surrender to the cause, and when should someone... So my understanding is when you surrender to someone or to something, then you let that guide you. So when do you stop listening to your own inner voice and start listening to someone else's guidance?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier that the yoga practices, we are talking Patanjali yoga practices, they are essentially meant for independent spiritual seekers to practice. This is an important point, remember. They are meant for independent spiritual practitioners to practice. We need not extend it to other areas of politics or sociology or other areas. That's an important point to remember. Even in a Hindu pantheon, there were so many diverse schools of thought, mutually contradictory systems of philosophy, and they all coexisted for thousands of years, and different traditions came to India. They were accepted and honored. That's a unique legacy of the country. We are not extending the self-surrender idea, the Isvapanidhana idea beyond its yoga context. If you extend it to other areas, then we be landing in troubled waters. So here, what is meant by here? Suppose you go to the nearby temple, where you become a devotee of Shiva, Vishnu, whatever deity. Maybe your own home you had a shrine. You used to do puja. When you dedicate your effort completely to the deity with a sense of self-surrender. That's what is meant here. And again, real self-surrender is the last stage is the ultimate stage in devotional philosophy. It's called Prapatti by Ramanuja or Sharanagati. Anugulyasya sankalpaha pradigulyasya varjanam rakshasya vishwasa goptutva varanam tatha apanikshepakarpanesham vidha Sharanagati. Means you always have positive ideas and the negative ideas should be removed, and then you should always look upon God as a protector, and you accept Him as your soulmate, and you this kind of self-surrender idea. Now remember, it is the highest state in our spiritual evolution. You can find this among all the great saints of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity, Judaism. You find this. So you find this in very much in the Russian Orthodox Church, the way of a pilgrim in Philokalia. You can find this in the lives of Saint John of Cross or Saint Teresa of Avila, the Spanish saints. You find no. So the idea, this is a kind of spiritual self-surrender we are talking about. So it has two stages. As a practice, as a part of niyama, it's called one of the niyamas, Shauja, Santosha, Tapa, Swadhyaya, Iswapanithana. Fifth niyama. Here in the niyama category, it is mentioned as a practice, not in the sense of ultimate Sharanagati or self-surrender, and it's mentioned in Ramanuja's Vaishnava philosophy, or as you find in the writings of Saint Teresa of Avila or Saint John of Cross. We are not talking about that. Here we are talking about, well, our surrender to a higher idea. That's all. As a spiritual discipline. And when you surrender yourself to a higher spiritual idea, spiritual principle, what happens? You feel spiritually enriched. Spiritually you get sublimated. That's the idea behind. Okay. Blind surrender to an ideology, that is absolutely no relevance in the context of Yoga Sutra discussions. Now, that's something different. It's a different problem. It is a sociological problem, it's a political problem, which is, and this is not the platform to discuss those questions. Though it's very relevant, but there are other platforms where we can discuss those wonderful subjects. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Swamiji, this is Baba.
Yeah, most welcome.
So, in some place they say that if you get Ashtasiddhi, then you are bound to go away from the realization of God goal. So why is that?
Yeah, normally people get stuck, they get attracted when they get Ashtasiddhi. Ashtasiddhi is what byproduct, You cannot sell the byproduct, only the main product you can sell. When you manufacture something in a factory, there are certain things which may be byproducts which you sell at lower price, but that's not what you package and sell, Like that, in spirit, in our yoga practice, in the course of meditation, in the course of all these yamas and niyamas, one may develop certain skills, extraordinary skills. There is nothing occult in it. When you do certain disciplines with the body acquires certain skills. When you do some disciplines with your mind also acquires certain skills. This is like Ashtasiddhis are like that. And the point is, those who, some sound is heard, those who are not, you can mute it at the individual level, otherwise be disturbed. Please. So one request to our listeners, friends, please mute. Discussion can be disturbed. So what I mean to say, it is mentioned, it is universally accepted that those who get stuck and get attracted by any of these so-called 8 powers, vibhuti skills, they won't be able to go beyond that, because mind may go down. If those who are able to acquire some special skills and they give a lot of importance to those skills, the mind gets stuck, and that will be the beginning of their fall. The higher you fall, the higher you fly, the lower you fall. But one important point should be remembered and emphasized here. That's very important. Many of the greatest spiritual giants the world produced, they possessed some of these unique skills, and they, not deliberately, they happen to use some of these skills for the great work that they did for the good of humanity. That should be remembered. In the life of Jesus, you find many miracles, or the parables you can find, even the Pentecost. Many of these, I'm not going into those details. So also in Buddha's, in the Tripitakas you find Buddha not parading, but he could do certain things which a normal person may not have been able to do. And we already discussed Shankaracharya. See, look at Sri Ramakrishna. Now, a person like Vivekananda, who was an agnostic student, he came to Sri Ramakrishna, and he was completely transformed into a devotee of God and a spiritual teacher by Sri Ramakrishna. And Swami Vivekananda himself, when he came to this country, people who came in contact with him, some of them had contact only for a very short time. They completely transformed. So you can find this happening. They were not parading or displaying or making too much of these skills. But as part of their activity, these powers, they happen to use without their being aware of it. Somebody came to Sri Ramakrishna and he had a new life. Girish Chandra Ghosh, a drunkard, was turned into a saint by Sri Ramakrishna. How do you explain this? Can a normal person do that? No, cannot possible. Somebody who was not educated even, Swami Adbhutananda, he became a great saint. So these things happen if you read lives of many mystics, you find this happening. Of course, there is one difference in the Christian mystical tradition. Miracles, 3 miracles are the criteria for canonization. If you read the lives of these great saints, they themselves were not so much bothered about whether they had these skills or not. No. If you read the lives of Saint Teresa of Avila or Saint John of Cross, anybody, they did not make too much of whatever skills they had. But later, these miracles became the criteria for canonization. Christ himself rejected miracles, 3 temptations, one is a miracle. Christ, Satan tempted Christ, you jump from the top of the tower, and Christ, no, he didn't want to test God, So, power, wealth and miracle, the 3 temptations, Christ rejected. Actually, in Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor, the cardinal is telling Christ, we are with him. You rejected the 3 temptations, but we went for it, and we are using it. You can find in Dostoevsky. That's of course the anticlimax. I'm not referring too much important to that. The point is, Christ did not want miracles, nor miraculous powers. He rejected wealth, power, and miracle. He rejected. You find. But Christ himself was a great miracle worker. You find all the 12 great disciples, and the miracle is continuing. So how do you explain? Where do you draw the line? So also Shankaracharya, Sri Ramakrishna, or Buddha, you find. All these great spiritual teachers. They had these powers, where they did not make public display of this. And they didn't, as I mentioned, it was not a big deal for them. That's the expression that I would like to use. They didn't make too much of this. because they knew these are byproducts which they should not focus too much upon. That's it. Okay. Thank you. Question. Your question. Yeah. So the main point is, if you get focused on them, they will bring you down. That's the main thing. That's why it is said. If you focus too much on Ashtasiddhis, those siddhis will bring you down. Powers will bring you down. If you discard them, they may come up, they may be of some use to you, but you don't pay too much of attention to it. That's the idea.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Swamiji, I've always battled with one question.
Yeah.
So, how do you balance out this desire to attain spiritualism while handling all your worldly duties? So, Gautama Buddha, for example, he left his family, he left his wife, he left his child, gave up everything. And of course, he's contributed so much to mankind and to spirituality and everything. But how do you balance out the fact that he's left his family without support?
Yeah. In fact, there's a very relevant question. This morning we had a class on Sri Ramakrishna's gift to the world. We'll make it public after a few days. So, in that talk I quoted, Sri Ramakrishna, the teacher of Vivekananda, when he was staying in Dakshineshwar temple, some householders came and he found they had neglected their duties. They left their wife and children at home and pretending to be a devotee of God. Sri Ramakrishna scolded them and asked them to go back. You go to your home, you work, do some work and earn your livelihood and look after your wife and children and parents. That's your duty. Now remember, I'm narrating this incident. We had this discussion this morning. In the context of Buddha, we should know Buddha's life, Buddha's example cannot be an example for everyone. Buddha stands in a different class. Sri Ramakrishna and Buddha, they stand different class because Sri Ramakrishna himself was an embodiment of all renunciation. So also Buddha. Can we say that Christ did not look after his father Joseph, who was not a rich man? He was a young man, he should have looked after him. We can't say that because they are epoch makers. The ordinary rules don't apply to them. But in the context of people who are at the beginning of the spiritual journey, they cannot neglect their duties and then prosper in spiritual life. So at the beginning of one's spiritual life, proper performance of responsibilities and duties in your home, in society, in your professional context, that is the first stage. It's called Swadharma. It's the first stage in spiritual life. Doing our duty properly, sincerely, and performing our duties and responsibilities. Now, how do we bring in spirituality into this? That's the question. We can bring in spirituality by bringing in element of, let us say, which called in Sanskrit is called anasakti or non-attachment. Non-attachment here means not having too much of obsessive desire, not having too much of obsessive likes and dislikes for certain things, or persons, or events. That you can bring in. Extreme infatuation, extreme attachment to a point of becoming obsessed with that. That we must avoid. So, being even-minded. Do our duty, but do it as a duty with all sincerity and sacredness. And then, whenever we get free time, we should read holy scriptures, books, and try to practice meditation, all the spiritual disciplines. At the same time, we should be sincere in the performance of our daily duties in our family, in society, and also in public office. This is how we begin our spiritual life, actually. One cannot prosper in spiritual life just by neglecting duties and responsibilities. But in the performance of duties and responsibilities, one can bring in a sense of sanctity and sacredness. This performance of duty itself is a spiritual discipline. When we do our work with a lot of likes and dislikes, obsessions, strong likes and dislikes, there is no spirituality in it. The same work when we do as an offering to God, with the same enthusiasm, efficiency, but with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, the same work becomes a spiritual. So the line of demarcation between secular and spiritual disappears for such a person. Even secular duties you can do as a spiritual work. So the secular merges with the spiritual. That is the beginning of one's spiritual life.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Swami.
Yeah, thank you.
Swamiji, but Buddha was a prince. And when he left his wife and kids, he had enough money for their support,
Yeah.
I would think.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, still, I don't think anyone should imitate Buddha. Even if you have plenty of money and a big house, still, Buddha's example should not be emulated. It's certainly not an example for common people, never. So, Buddha, actually, at some stage, this discussion comes, and Buddha's family members also became nuns, and his son became a Buddhist monk. But such examples happen very rarely. Very rarely. That's a different matter. Yeah.
Yogi, please go and ask your question. You're next.
Yeah. Namaskar.
Sattva Shuddhi, how much importance does the food have in this, and are there any regulations about fasting in this respect to increase the sattva?
Yeah. Really, when we do fasting or when we perform any of these vows, we are deliberately denying our physical body certain things that it normally cherishes. So that actually helps us to get a promotion in our own spiritual evolution, a transcendental ascent we get. Because when you can withstand hunger or thirst, of course, it is mentioned in the Yoga Sutra and also in Gita elsewhere, it should be moderate. It should not be extreme. Asceticism is not recommended either in Buddhism, in the yoga, or in the mainstream Hinduism, not at all. So, all austerities, all practices of these vows are meant to help us to take an ascent in our spiritual life. So when we deny our body certain things that it normally enjoys or cherishes, we are actually recognizing the importance of something beyond the body, that is the mind, culture, emotions and samskaras. So that actually brings in an element of sattva shuddhi. It's called sattviga gunas. Sattviga gunas. When sattva guna increases, chitta shuddhi, sattva shuddhi, all will increase. That's the idea behind. We can give an example. Suppose a person is fasting. Suppose very restless person is fasting for 2-3 days, reading some scriptures, practicing prayers for a few hours, and you go and talk to him who has practiced this at least for 12 hours a day. In the evening, if you go and meet him, you find he has become more calm and quiet. Why this happens? If he practices that, not continuously, for some days, slowly that person, he appears to have become more calm and quiet, and he also starts feeling kind of inner serenity and peace. It means sattva-guna increases. And when sattva-guna increases, this sattva-shuddhi, saumanasya, all these will increase. That's what Patanjali says. It can be physically verified in many cases.
3 days ago was Mahashivratri. I fasted and did the Jagarana. I was very calm. But I think it was because of weakness rather than sattva. I don't know what to interpret out of that.
Yeah, if it is just weakness, then you will become restless. Weakness will not give you peace of mind. If just weakness, then actually weakness creates bitterness and restlessness. See, if somebody fasts, he is not willing, he doesn't enjoy fasting, but he wants to fast. And if that person fasts too much, if he enforces upon himself this vow of fasting, you find he is not very happy. He becomes bitter within, and that bitterness will express. There is no doubt about it. It's a fact. Unless you attach a sanctity and sacredness to your ritual of fasting, you will not be able to enjoy peace of mind while doing fasting. It makes you restless and somewhat bitter. Yeah.
Thank you.
Swamiji,
Yeah.
Swamiji,
Yeah.
this is Jyoti.
Yeah.
Swamiji, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Please, thank you. Please go ahead.
There was a Jain person I met, a Jain family. So this family, there was a child who had an incurable problem, a lot of developmental issues. And the father was fasting for a whole month just on water. You see. So their faith, I guess Jainism encourages these kind of routines which the child had, from a medical point of view, an incurable problem, but he was hoping. Of course, he was doing fundraising and doing a lot of other activities so that I guess the Jain faith encourages. See, many Jain families, they fast for a month, but I mean, it's more than 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
With just water.
Yeah, the Jains are well known for that kind of extreme asceticism. Yeah. Thank you.
Neeru, your question next. Go ahead.
Hi, Swamiji.
Yeah.
My question is about what you mentioned about duty for work. So these days we have so many choices and options for what we do for work and what our job is. When you talk about doing our duty at work, what do Vedanta and the Yoga Sutras teach us about how we should choose what work or what job we should do?
Yeah. According to our tradition, any job that is available and that gives you a feeling of contentment, that you should choose. If there is an option, but not everyone can get the job he or she is looking for. That is true. But as far as possible, if we can get the job, if there is an option, we can get a job that gives us a feeling of inner contentment. That will be helpful. Yeah.
Are there any other criteria or anything else that we should be thinking about in terms of what we do?
Yeah, I think the contentment, it is a very profound concept. It gives you the feeling, well, I'm doing the right thing, I'm doing something which I should do in terms of my qualifications, my responsibilities, my professional status, or whatever it is. It is the right thing for me to do for my own good, and that's my way of doing what I can do for the good of others, for the good of the world. If any job gives you that kind of feeling, there's no better job than that for us. But as I mentioned, this may not be always available in actual life, but this should be our goal as far as possible.
One other follow-up, if that's okay. And if we are if we are needing to do something which it doesn't fit with those things, how should we approach that and deal with it with the right mindset?
Yeah, if we have to do certain job, certain work that we don't really want to do, but there's no other way, because you have to do the whatever job is available for your livelihood. In that case, do that work, but when you get extra time, you do something that you actually like doing. That's what we can do. So that the work we don't like, we have to do for our livelihood, and we should also try to get time to do what we actually like doing. That's the only way in this practical world. Yeah.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
Swamiji,
Yeah.
suppose we have a special area in the house where we keep our idols and pictures and you do a meditation long term. Does that become a shrine?
Yeah,
Or have the
certainly.
same?
Yeah, certainly. If you have sincere faith, it certainly becomes a shrine, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We have just a few more minutes. If you have no other question, we'll conclude. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for listening with patience. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.